Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of 2D Twin Stick Top-Down Shooter. My name is Casanis. Guys, in the last episode we took a look at our enemy and we got that enemy running around. In this episode we're going to take a look at the idea of aggro and how to have an enemy not just immediately go after your player. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so like I said, last time we got our enemy moving and the enemy immediately starts to chase our player. And that's how we set it up. So the enemy's immediately chasing after our player. And that's not exactly what we want to happen, or it might not be what we want to happen. Maybe we want to set it up so that our enemy is in the map somewhere within our level, and whenever our player gets within a certain distance, then the enemy kind of springs into action and starts chasing after our player. That's one option. The other option is we want it to do exactly as it does here. It chases our player immediately and doesn't stop chasing our player until the game is over. So we've added in this aggro zone. That's what I've done here. I've added in this aggro zone. I'm trying to keep everything modular. And the aggro zone itself is going to be in charge of determining whether or not our enemy is chasing our player or not chasing our player. The aggro zone itself is relatively simplistic. Obviously, it's simply a child of our goblin base or your enemy base. It's got a collider that I've turned into a trigger, and I've used a circular collider to make sure that we've got an area all the way around our enemy. And it has this enemy aggro controller, and that's obviously the code that's going to control whether or not our enemy is chasing our player. Now, there's a couple things that are going to be important, and you can see them right away. I've got a reference to the enemy movement controller and a reference to the aim controller. So the enemy controller and the aim controller are both located here on the goblin base. If we scrub down, we're going to find our aim controller right here, and that aim controller is just determining who we're aiming at. That's all it is, who we're aiming at. I've set this up so it's going to be multiplayer, possibly. So I've written the code with that in mind. If you are deciding you're going to do something as even local multiplayer, it's a good idea to start thinking about it kind of right away. In doing so, you'll be able to make adjustments to your code as you're moving along, and then it becomes really easy just to make things multiplayer. So I've got this enemy aim controller, and obviously as we have multiple enemies well, they're not enemies to this guy. They're this guy's enemies. If we have multiple players that come into the enemy's field of view, we're going to want to make sure that the enemy is aiming at the right player. So we have a reference to that. We also have a reference to our AI path down here, and our AI path has this option for can move. We're going to adjust can move depending on whether or not the enemy is supposed to start moving right away, or whether or not the enemy is supposed to wait until after the player is within a certain distance within the aggro zone. We're also going to have to know which player we're chasing. So in this particular case, we're going to need a link to the destination setter as well, where we can adjust the target. So the target, remember, if you guys remember correctly from last episode, we put in a target and then there's a calculation of a path to that target. So we're going to have to adjust this target based on which player we're chasing or whether or not there's a player within a certain distance. Okay, so let's take a look in the aggro zone. Let's take a look at this enemy aggro controller. Let me just pull it over here. So the enemy aggro, this is the movement controller. The enemy aggro controller is right here. So the enemy aggro controller is relatively simplistic again. We've got a couple of things in here. I've got a public float for an initial aggro radius and a public float for a chase aggro radius. Now, what this is going to be used for is determining whether or not the player is within a certain distance to initially cause aggro in our enemy. And once the enemy has been aggroed, we increase to the chase aggro radius. The chase aggro radius is going to be larger than the initial aggro radius, and that prevents our player from kind of dodging in and out at the edges of that trigger. If we make the aggro radius larger, the player will automatically be engulfed within that radius, and they'll remain within that radius instead of being able to dodge in and out. So there'll be a time where our enemy is chasing after our player. Below that, I've got this has been hard coded, and obviously I would have to rethink exactly how this is done, but I've got something that I've labeled as the max aggro radius. And like I said before, you may have a situation where you want your enemies to immediately start chasing after your player. So as soon as they instantiate it, or as soon as the game starts, they're immediately chasing after your player. Or you may wish to have your enemies wait until they are within a certain radius. So this max aggro radius is going to be uh, if the players are immediately being chased. And I've just kind of hard coded it now, and I've kind of done this in a really quick and dirty way. Using all the same code that I would use for the chase. However, I'm just making the trigger really, really big. That might not be the best way of doing it. You could probably set yourself up some kind of registry. So you've got like a player registry, and then as the players come in, they register to this game registry or player registry, and then the enemies search that player registry and determine who they're chasing. That's probably a better way of doing it, but I've kind of done it a really quick and dirty way here. I'm just utilizing my same code over again. Below that, we have ourselves a reference to our circle collider. So it's going to allow us to change the radius of the circle collider. And here I've got a public reference to the enemy movement controller as well as the enemy aim controller. That's going to allow us to change who we're aimed at and change whether or not this enemy is actually moving. Now here we've got ourselves a list of game objects, and this is probably an unnecessary step. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here may be unnecessary. I am keeping in mind that I might be changing this over to a local multiplayer game where players can kind of drop in and drop out. If that's going to be the case, I'm going to want to make sure that my enemy has a list of all of the enemies within its radius, or like my enemy has a list of all of its enemies, so the players within its radius, or it has a list of all the players in the game when it first starts. So I've got this contact list set up here, and we did this before as well when we were working on. I think it was on the enemy shooting tower. We had something like this as well. So whenever something comes into this content, into its circle, into its collider area, it'll be added to the list, and then it'll use that list later on to determine what its target actually is. Below that, we have a reference to a game object, the current target, so the current player that's being chased. And lastly, here in our parameters, we have in our variables, we have a public bool that is called isAggro. And isAggro is going to be used to determine whether or not the enemy is currently aggroed, or if upon start it is actually set to true, then we're going to determine that this is an enemy that's always chasing the players. So it's never stopping. It's not going to like wait for someone to show up. So if is aggro is true to start with, it's chasing the players all the time. If it's not, then it's going to be waiting for some player to come into its aggro zone. Our start function right here has a number of different things in it. So first of all, we are looking for our circle collider, and this is going to just a reference to our circle collider, and that way we can adjust the radius. If on start aggro is true, we're going to set our initial aggro radius, our chase aggro radius, and our area to its max. So everything is going to be set up to the maximum size. This is going to ensure that all the players are automatically in that zone and they can't leave it. Right? That max aggro zone was large, like 1,000. I made up a number, 1,000. It's inefficient the way I've done it, but it works. If we do not start off as aggro, then we immediately set our enemy movement target to null. So if I go over here to our enemy movement controller and I scrub down here, I've added in a couple of public functions that are accessible outside, obviously, because they're public. And I've got the set can move, and all this does is set whether or not our enemies can actually move forward. So it triggers the can move option, that bool. And it sets the target. So here is our set movement target, and it's looking for a particular target in the setter option. So again, if I just move this out of the way for a second, and we take a look at our goblin base, and we scrub down here, all the way down here, we have our nope, that's not it. We have our can move right here. So if the can move is true, our enemy is going to chase things, and we have our destination setter right here where we determine the target. Okay, awesome. So let's go on back to our aggro controller here. So as I've mentioned right here, if we are not aggroed, then we are setting our movement controller, we're setting the target to nothing. So it's not actually calculating a path at any given point in time. We're only going to calculate the path when it's necessary. And we are automatically setting our aggro to whatever the aggro state is. So if it is aggroed, we can set our can move to true, which will set can move to true, yeah. And if it's false, then the enemy will not move. Okay, so let's go down here and take a look at our on trigger enter and our on trigger exits. Now again, I've set this up to make sure that we can easily switch over to a local multiplayer game. So if the other object coming in, so the other collider coming in, has a tag of player, then we know that it's actually a player that's moving into this zone. If it is a player, then we're going to add it to that contact list. So we've added a new entry to that contact list. If we do not have a current target, that means that this current object is the first one to come in, and we set our current object to the other game object, so the game object that's come in, and then we go ahead and we set our actual target, so movement, our target itself, to that transform, so we're actually chasing after that particular transform, and we are also setting up our aim target. Let's take a look at what we had to do with our aim controller. A couple little tiny things we had to do within our aim controller. We had to make sure that we were aiming at the right player. So if we have multiplayer within here, multiple players, we're going to have to make sure that our weapon is aimed at the right player. Remember, our weapon works based on a projectile that's launched in the direction that we say to launch it. And if we're not aiming at the right person, then obviously we're never going to hit that person, that character. So I've got a public function in here that says set aim target. It just simply takes the game object and it sets the transform to be aimed at. That's it. Super easy. We didn't change anything else in here. So as long as there is a target, then in the update, we're going to keep aiming towards that target. Nothing's really changed here. We just simply added in this public function as well as this check to see if we actually have a target. Nothing else has changed. So let's go on back to our aggro controller. So yeah, we set our aim there, so we got our weapon aimed the right way. We automatically set aggro to true. We don't have to worry about it. If there's something that's in this space, then our aggro is going to be true. We don't have to determine whether or not it was true before. We don't care. We're just setting our aggro to be true, and we're setting our can move on. So our can move is also true. So even if this is not the first character, we're just setting it up again so that it's automatically chasing whatever was chasing before. Now, right here, what we're doing is we're increasing the radius of our aggro area to make sure that the player can't dodge in and out. We're just setting it to the chase aggro radius. Okay, let's take a look at the on trigger exit. Similarly, if it is our player, so if the other object coming in, the other collider coming in has a tag of player, then we want to actually remove it from the list because it's now exited from that area. If this is a character, if this is a player, or if this particular enemy stops chasing, then we're going to want to know that and remove everything. And if it's removed, then we're all set. So we set if our current tag is equal to that game object that's left, then we want to set our current target to be null. Okay, and we want to set our movement target to nothing as well, so we're no longer calculating a path, and we want to set our aim to be null as well. If our contact list has more than one object in it, so as long as it's greater than 0, as long as it's 1 or more, then we're just simply going to set our current target equal to the next target in line. And I didn't calculate which one's the closest. I probably should. I'm being a little bit lazy here. I should probably look through the contact list, find out which enemy is the closest, and then set that one to my next enemy. That's probably what I should be doing here, but I did this kind of a quick and dirty, lazy way. Instead, I simply just added the next one in the contact list. We immediately set our target transform, so we are now calculating a path to that new target, and we are setting our aim to be fighting with that particular target. If, however, our contact list has no entries in it, then we no longer have a valid target. So we reset our aggro radius to its initial aggro size. So we're back to normal. We're just simply waiting for a new character to come in. We set our target to null, so we're not calculating a path. We set our aggro to false, so we're not aggravated anymore. We set our can move to null, or to false, so that we are no longer trying to fight, no longer trying to move, excuse me. And lastly, we set our aim target to null, so we're no longer doing that calculation where we're aiming our aim base at its current existing target. Okay, and that is the entirety of the aim aggro controller. Like I said, there's not a lot that's going on here. It's relatively simplistic. Most of it is just simply adjusting the size of our controller. Have we made any other changes? We had to make a couple of different changes as well within here. So we are checking a number of different things. Previously, all we were doing in our fixed update in our enemy movement controller to turn on our animation was determine whether or not our AI path had a velocity and its magnitude, as long as its magnitude is greater than 0, it's just this line here by itself. As long as the absolute value of our magnitude of our vector for our AI path calculation was greater than 0, that means it was moving towards something. It wasn't at its destination yet, and therefore we set our is moving to be true inside of our animator, and that allowed for the simplistic animation of the enemy moving. Now we couldn't leave it like that anymore because in certain cases we don't want our character to be moving anymore. We want it to change. So if we're not actually able to move, we don't want the animation to occur. So what I've done in here is simply said if can move is true, then we are going to go ahead and do our animation calculation here and start our character's animation. If, however, we cannot move, then we are going to set our animation parameter to be false, and therefore we'll no longer be animating. And I think that's all that we added in. We obviously had to add in the AI path and that kind of stuff to make sure. No, we had that before, didn't we? Yes, we had all this before. Nothing's new. Nothing's new here. Nothing's new at all. In fact, I don't even know if I used. Oh, yes, I do right here. I did have to add in this line, so I'm lying to you. I did have to add in this line. I needed a reference to our destination setter to make sure that we could change our target. And that's it. Okay, so let's move our code out of the way and let's take a look at how this actually works. Let me just start off by deleting this extra player. So let me close this up. Let me just delete this extra player so you can see how it's working with a single player to begin with. Let me click on our enemy base so we can actually see the enemy itself. Let's check the aggro zone first of all. Currently, it is not set to be aggroed immediately. So this character, this enemy right here, will not chase our player immediately. Let's go back to our enemy base right here and let's hit play and see what happens. So there we go. Our enemy is not actually currently moving. However, if I move into the aggro zone, you can see that the aggro area has gotten larger. And if I leave that aggro zone, then the enemy immediately stops chasing us. If I enter back in, there we go. It's now chasing me again. You can see that the weapon is pointed in the right way. It's going to catch me maybe. It's pointed in the right way. So our enemy is now calculating. We still have a current target. If I come back in, it chases me. All right. And once it catches me, obviously it'll go through and do its regular attacks. Okay, awesome. If I have our enemy aggro set to be true, so is aggro is true, all I do is I increase this radius to a very large size. So my player is immediately engulfed within that radius. So if I hit play, you'll see that this enemy immediately starts to chase us. We can no longer see that collider. It's still there. That trigger is still there. It's just really big. That's it. And it's going to chase me all around. I can't actually leave that aggro zone now. So this enemy is operating like the original enemy that we had. All right. Oh, he caught me. He's killing me. He's killing me. Okay, let's stop that. Now, let's take a look at what happens if I have multiple players within this area. So let me just take our player base. Let's just duplicate it. And we'll just move it over a bit. So we'll put it down here like this. So now we have 2 players in the game. So if this was a multiplayer game, what would happen? I'm going to leave that aggro set. So my aggro zone is still set to be true. It'll immediately start chasing one of our players. I don't know which one it's going to chase. It's whichever one it grabs first. So it's going after that one. And once it kills that guy down there, I should have reduced the health. Once it kills that one off, it immediately looks for a new player to chase. So now it's chasing me, which is exactly what we want. Fight back, fight back, fight back. There we go. Good. All right. What happens if aggro is not set to true? So let's go down here and turn off our is aggro, and let's hit play. Now, nothing's going to move because aggro is not set to true. However, if I enter in here and I start running away, and there we go, I'm running away, and I'm leaving that poor little druid. Now it's chasing after that druid down there. Oh, that's the other guy shooting at me. All right, and when they kill that druid at the bottom off, it's not going to immediately start chasing me because I've left the aggro zone. It doesn't know where I am. When I enter back in, oh, it's chasing me now. All right, so that's it, guys. That's how easy it was to get aggro working on our enemy players. All right, guys, I hope that was what you were looking for. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, let me know down below with a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down is perfectly fine. I'm still rusty at this. It's taking me a little while. My kids are bugging me now. They actually want me to make them some gameplay videos. I don't know. I haven't done it in so long. But I hope you guys are enjoying what I'm doing here, and I'm hoping you guys are building something of your own. I'd love to see it. Tell me down in the comments what you're working on. I'd love to see what you're doing with this. All right, everyone, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments down below, and if you haven't done so, please take a few seconds to subscribe. Have yourselves a wonderful day, everyone.